Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at Beethoven symphony recordings. Certainly a central, if not the central part of any collector's repertoire. Now, Beethoven composed 9 symphonies from 1800 to 1824, about 3 years before his death. Now, 24 years may not seem like a lot of time to compose 9 major works, let alone masterpieces, but for Beethoven, time was compressed. He didn't live very long. These symphonies span a huge range. Number 1, a light Haydn-esque type symphony. Number 3, announcing a departure from the old nice symphonies of the past. Number 5, the most popular one, the volcanic one. Number 6 is a program work depicting nature as Beethoven saw it. 7 is a dance symphony, and then all the way up to number 9, which is a huge work spanning over an hour. Although it's in the conventional 4 movements, the last movement features 4 soloists, a chorus, and everybody singing about the brotherhood of mankind. So there's a huge range from beginning to end. So why was Beethoven considered so important and revolutionary in terms of music? Well, he composed some masterpieces and some great pieces of music to listen to, but he was also that revolutionary. So before Beethoven's time, music was, for lack of a better word, nice. It was just nice. I mean, if you listen to a Haydn symphony, and don't get me wrong, I love Haydn symphonies, they tend to be nice. Well, if you listen to Beethoven's music, sometimes he points out that life sometimes is not very nice at all. The Third Symphony is commonly considered the one where he announces that I'm going to do something completely different. It's a big, large work starting with 2 declamatory chords and then a theme that ends on the wrong note. And so because he did these things, he wasn't exactly popular, and he didn't endear himself with the establishment at the time. Critics were not very nice to him, and audiences didn't really know what to make of his work at first. This, of course, frustrated him immensely. Now, because we have a lot of music here spanning a great deal of time and a great deal of emotional depth from one end to the other, it's not surprising that there are many different valid interpretations and approaches that you can take to this music. So, in other words, that justifies you buying lots of recordings, which I have here. But therein lies the problem. It's very unusual to find one conductor, one set of performers who are good consistently throughout this entire range of music. What sometimes happens is the people who are good at the early works tend to be a little bit less so towards the later end of his career, and vice versa. But that doesn't stop conductors and performers from performing and making complete sets and cycles. So let's take a look at the cycles first. Now, on these Beethoven symphony cycles, there have been a lot of them made. It seems as though if you're a musician or an ensemble of some repute, you tend to want to make a Beethoven symphony cycle just to put your stamp on this for posterity. If nothing else, after you're gone, there will be this record, this testament as to what you thought about this music. And fortunately, because of the forces and the amount of expertise that you would have to marshal to make all of these works together and record them all, most of these symphony sets tend to be pretty good. We have a vast middle class of recordings that are in that good to very good range. So it's really hard to find a bad Beethoven symphony set. So if you're just starting out, you can pretty much throw a dart and get something that's pretty good. But there are a few sets that are consistently mentioned as being better than the others, and the ones that you should seek out as opposed to just throwing a dart. And some of these actually don't cost very much since they've been in the catalog for quite some time. Now, the one that everybody cites, and deservedly so, is the 1963 Herbert von Karajan set on DG Berlin Philharmonic. This is probably the most readily recommendable set that you can have out there. All of the 9 performances are good. There isn't a weak one in the set. This is justifiably one of the most famous recordings that has ever been made. It has been reissued and remastered and so forth and so on many, many different times through the course of its lifetime, and it will probably continue to be so as long as people listen to music. Now, Herbert von Karajan You know, he was a techie. He was a geek, and he tended to record and re-record and re-record the standard repertoire many, many times over. Those cycles tended to coincide with advances in technology. These include the long playing record in the 1940s, stereo, and digital. You can pretty much segment his career out by those technical advances. So we have a set in the 1940s, we have the 1963, widely considered to be the best, we have a 1977 set, and then we have a set from the early 1980s. Now, as much as I like this, and I think you should get this, you should have this in your library in some form. Anybody who cares about music needs these recordings. At some point, you're going to want to hear Beethoven's 9 symphonies. But I'll go ahead and say this. I think I like the 1977 set a little bit better than this one. They feel bigger, they feel more important, and there's more of a sense of an occasion. Now, I think my opinion is in the minority on this one. If you're going to go with the crowd, stay with the 1963. Now, the one Herbert von Karajan set you want to avoid is this one. This is the last one he did, the digital cycle, early 1980s. These are awful recordings and show this conductor, let's face it, at his considerable worst. These are terrible recordings, and you know, there are lots of bad recordings out there, but the reason these get my ire in a way that the others don't. Let's take, Leonard Bernstein, for example. He made some really bad recordings toward the end of his career. But I make a distinction because Bernstein at least had a point of view. He was experimenting, he was trying stuff out, he had a point of view. What I don't like about what happened towards the middle and late part of Herbert von Karajan's career is that it acted like he didn't really care anymore. It doesn't sound here that the musicians really care about what they're doing, and this is just awful. And I don't know why, but I have multiple copies of this set lying around here. In fact, I think there's 2 more ninths just sitting in this pile behind me that I brought up for this review. So, you know what though? It looks nice, doesn't it? DG was really good at marketing. Another set that's commonly mentioned is this one, the one by Leonard Bernstein, also on DG. This is a more personal look at the symphonies, as Leonard Bernstein's recordings tend to be. The only issue is if your particular aesthetics don't match the personality that he wants to put on these symphonies, you may not like them. But even having said that, I think he's on pretty good behavior here. These are middle-of-the-road performances, I think in better sound than any of the Herbert von Karajan recordings. And if I had to listen to one or the other, I think I might pick this one just because they have a little bit more character. Okay, so if I had to pick one Beethoven symphony set that I would pick over all of the others, it's neither of those. I'm going to pick, for you, the one by Bruno Walter, Columbia Symphony Orchestra, CBS, Sony. Now, Bruno Walter was a very nice man, and this showed in his conducting. His music tends to be genial and easy to approach, but there's a little bit of the personality that you see in there also. There was a story that somebody once told about him. They were in rehearsal, and it had not gone well. And I think like a lot of other conductors would have ranted and screamed and insulted the musicians, he simply put his baton down and said, "Gentlemen, your playing bothers me very much, and you disappoint me." And there was a musician who was playing for him at the time. He said, that statement from Bruno Walter hurt more than all of the other times a mean conductor had yelled at him. Okay, so you know me, I'm going to give you a dark horse candidate for one that is under the radar and one that you haven't seen before. And that is the Beethoven Symphony Cycle by Hungarian Philharmonic Orchestra on the budget laser light label, János Ferenczig conductor. Who? Yeah, exactly. Now, these things languished in bargain bins for years in the 1980s. Nobody paid any attention to these things. Let me tell you, they are fantastic recordings. These will hold up against anything that you'll put out there by the big names. And in particular, I'm going to point out the Ninth Symphony. When the baritone comes in that last movement, you'll not only hear it, you'll feel it. Check these out. So again, it's really hard to point out a bad set of Beethoven Symphony Cycle recordings, but I am going to point out one that I can't stand, and that is these. Hanover Band Nimbus Monica Huggett or Roy Goodman conducting. These are everything that you hate about period instruments dialed up to 11. These are ugly sounding recordings, and you can tell that they want the sound to be ugly. The Nimbus recording is boomy. It sounds like it was made in a cave. And, you know, some of this, you could feel the self-righteousness coming through here. I mean, this is the way you're supposed to listen to music. And, for example, here's one, the overtures. They're not just the overtures, they're the authentic overtures. You know, they're telling you that this is how you really need to be listening to this music. So again, this is a cornerstone of every performer's repertoire. Everybody wants to do a Beethoven symphony cycle, and it does lend itself to some rather interesting advertising. I'm going to point this one out. This is one of my favorites from the late 1980s. So Riccardo Muti did a cycle for EMI with the Philadelphia Orchestra. Take a look at the way that this ad copy reads. It says, Beethoven's symphonic legacy as interpreted by the leading conductor of our day, performed by the greatest orchestra of our day, recordings that will remain in the world's record catalogs as long as men and women value art. Oh my. Okay, so let's take a look at some notable other recordings that are individuals and not a part of a set or a cycle. I have a friend who says that the greatest conductors knew not to make sets, because what they would tend to do is make the performances of the symphonies that they identified with and then leave the others alone. So I don't know about you, but if I'd recorded most of these Beethoven symphonies and there was one or two that was kind of straggling out there, the temptation would be huge for me to complete them and so that I could, you know, make a box and they could market the thing. But no, the greatest conductors very often did not make sets. And among the individual recordings, probably the most famous one is this one. Carlos Kleiber, Symphonies number 5 and 7. If you haven't heard these before, you're in for a real treat. If you think you're tired of hearing these very familiar works, think again. He will make you listen to every single note. I don't know what Carlos Kleiber does. I've gone along and read along with the score. I have compared this to other recordings. I can't figure out why he makes everything he does sound so interesting. But I think it has something to do with rhythm. Carlos Kleiber was a master at rhythm and making it feel just right to you. So, you know, again, these are very famous, and no matter what kind of music you listen to, these belong in your library in some form. LP, CD, digital files, I don't care how you get it, these do belong in your library. Now, if you can't get enough Carlos Kleiber, and who can't, you can, in fact, do this. His father, Erich Kleiber, did Symphony number 7 for Decca with the Concertgebouw Orchestra. It is fascinating to compare the interpretations of father and son. They're pretty similar. They've got that same ability to get that central rhythmic line, that central pulse correct in a way that just feels good to listen to it. And I'm going to give you another one in that mold that you might not think of right away. Fritz Reiner, Chicago Symphony. Again, Beethoven's 5 and 7. In that same rhythmic mold as the Kleibers, but it's got a Reiner-like sort of stamp on it. And it's a very exciting recording. You should listen to this one as well. So of all the Herbert von Karajan ninths that I mentioned before, my favorite is this one, the 77. It is monumental in scope. Now, if you get this recording, put this on and wait until you hear the recapitulation in the first movement. It comes in like a tidal wave. You'll just feel like your whole soul rumbling. It feels so good to hear it. But my favorite ninth of all is this one, and it's not very well known, although it's from a famous conductor, Giulini on EMI. Now, Giulini did make or attempt to start a cycle on Sony late in life. I admire Giulini so much. It wasn't a great work. Seemed like slow ramblings of an old man. Why didn't you do this sooner, Giulini? You should have done it in LA. You should have done it in completion to this set. But this one is a monumental recording. There is a true sense of occasion here, and this is my favorite Beethoven ninth of all time. Now, in a similar vein, Giulini's fifth is one of my favorites, and again, I wish he had done more of these in LA. This is on a DG recording, and by the way, this is the only thing on this CD, and I hear critics complaining that, you know, 40 or 35-minute CD is too short and offers poor value. I have always disagreed with that statement. I never think that a CD is too short. I would rather have 35 minutes of outstanding music making than having them flesh this thing out with a bunch of stuff that I don't want. Put it another way, I think many CDs are too long. So on the Sixth Symphony, there is one and only one recording that still stands head and shoulders above all the rest and likely will for all of eternity, and that is, you all know what's coming up here, the one by Bruno Walter. This piece and this conductor seemed made for one another. By the way, if you like this recording, and you should like this one, also check out the Bruno Walter Brahms Second Symphony, another mild, genial, friendly work that just seems suited for the personality of this conductor. I don't know if this story was true or not, but stories have circulated throughout the years that Bruno Walter was once quoted as saying he was put on this earth to conduct this one work. Okay, so I'm going to partially backtrack on my drubbing of period instrument performances by pointing out a couple of them that I do happen to like. And my favorite of the individual recordings is this one, the Eroica by Christopher Hogwood. This is a great recording. It's bold, it's craggy, it's raw, and it's really exciting to listen to. And like all these guys that are into authenticity, he takes the first movement exposition repeat. So the first movement lasts 17 minutes and 49 seconds. That's a long time to hold your attention, but he does it. And this is a great recording. Okay, so this is the one that started the whole thing. Roger Norrington, Symphony No. 9. I didn't think this was a very good recording when I first heard it, and I don't think it's a very good recording even today. But you should listen to this because he's got some interesting ideas, and I was running across this in preparation for doing this, and I found in here, back in 1987 when I first got the recording, this. I was diagramming out the structure of the symphony, and you could sort of feel me trying to make sense of what I'm hearing here. So again, I don't think this is very good, but if you know and love this music, you do need to hear Norrington's Ninth. And my final recommendation for period instruments is the Symphony No. 2, also from the Norrington cycle. Now again, I don't think these are very good long-term solutions to you having a Beethoven symphony cycle. I don't think that these wear very well, but this No. 2 is fabulous. And there is a passage near the end of the first movement where the orchestral tutti comes in, and there's horns that come in, and they snarl, and they're wild, and they're loud. That is my favorite part of this symphony. Now, many people assume that the Eroica, the Third Symphony, is where Beethoven really stepped out of his mold and announced that he was going to be doing a different kind of music. And by the way, if you hate the fact that modern classical music has all those strange sounds in it, you have Beethoven to thank for all of that, because he broke down all those barriers, those things about structure and about what music should be, just changed after he did what he did. So many people assume that the third is where that happened, but to me it actually happened in the symphony before. Symphony No. 2 actually starts to break down those barriers, and it's in that moment, I think, where you hear those horns snarl that really announces that this is a different kind of composer and that music is never going to be the same way again. Whenever I hear this piece in concert or in a recording, I wait for that part near the end of the first movement, and it's never loud enough or bold enough for me, and I always think, oh, it's a missed opportunity. But here, Norrington gets it right. For 2 or 3 seconds, you will hear the loudest, rawest, just wildest horn scream coming out of the symphony that you've ever heard out of this work before, and it's very satisfying. Now, I'm not suggesting that you pay for a CD just to hear 2 or 3 seconds of a horn blaring, but, then again, I've heard worse ideas. Okay, so we should mention this one. The Berlin Wall Concert. Leonard Bernstein conducted Beethoven's Ninth at the fall of the Berlin Wall, and it was a huge show. If you look at the way this is marketed, it doesn't even say that it's Beethoven's Ninth until the third line. It says, Ode to Freedom. And then the second line is Bernstein in Berlin. And the third line, we actually get to find out what's being played. So he assembled orchestra members from most of the countries participating in the European theater of the Second World War: Germany, France, England, the United States, all sorts of musicians getting together, and this is, for lack of a better term, the worst or the best of Bernstein in his late years, depending on your point of view. I happen to think it's a little bit of both. These musicians, I don't think, had spent a lot of time in rehearsal playing together, and it shows. Bernstein's tempos are extremely slow, and everything is underlined. This performance lasts almost 80 minutes. It seems to last sometimes forever. Some Beethoven 9 Symphony recordings are as short as 63 or 64 minutes, stretching this thing out to the late 70s. This is a long time to sit through a Beethoven Symphony recording. Perhaps most controversial of all, in the last movement, he changes the word Freude to Freiheit, freedom. Some critics thought this was a bold move and indicative of a new kind of thing that was happening in the world. Other critics were just appalled that he would do something like this to Beethoven's music. Is this a great recording, or is this a terrible recording? And again, I think it's a little bit of both. Okay, and finally, we come to this. You know, Furtwangler, conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic, after the war, he fled to Switzerland, and by all reports, he did it just in the nick of time. It turns out he may have been hours from being arrested by the Nazis. Stayed in isolation for several years, did not return to his orchestra for a couple of years, and when he came back, there was a series of concerts that he did with the Berlin Philharmonic, Beethoven's 5th and 6th Symphonies. People who were there said that they remembered this night for the rest of their lives. Furtwangler had a lot to say about what had gone on during the war, and he was using this music to project what he was feeling. This is described as tense and uncomfortable and volcanic. The 5th Symphony, not for purists, this is a very personal recording and a very personal vision of what he thought this music should be. And if you think it's all negativity and anger, on the flip side of the program, the 6th Symphony is remarkably genial and free-flowing. So you've got this sort of yin-yang relationship between the two works about what he had felt about what had gone on. This is a recording that has been reissued many different times. All of them are in bad sound. You won't care. This is one of the greatest recordings of anything that has ever been made. Now, if you're interested in Furtwangler, which I am, I highly recommend this book, The Furtwangler Record. It goes through a lot of things that you can geek out over, performances and so forth. Recommended. This is a hardcover edition only, I think, and it may be out of print by the time you see this. It's okay, get a used copy, just get this in your library somehow. Okay, so there you have it, a look at some of my favorite Beethoven Symphony recordings of all time. I'm curious to hear some of yours. I look forward to reading your comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.